The sun sets in a haze of gold and crimson as the Orient Express glides into the Gare de Lyon station, its wheels scraping the tracks with a rhythmic precision that echoes the pulse of excitement in the air. The camera zooms in on Elsie Jeffries, her silhouette framed against the backdrop of the train's polished brass and gleaming windows. A woman in her late 20s, with porcelain skin that seems too perfect for the grimy reality of travel. She stands out among the bustling crowd, a delicate figure with a faint tremor in her hands, gripping her luggage as if it might slip away. Her eyes wide, alert, dart nervously from one corner of the station to the other. She's not just another passenger on this luxurious journey. She's a woman on the edge. The crowd moves around her like a swirling tide, but her mind is somewhere else, somewhere darker. She inhales sharply, her fingers brushing the edge of a worn envelope she clutches against her chest, almost as if it holds the key to her every thought. The camera follows her gaze as she looks out at the train's gleaming windows. In the reflection, a glimpse of her face faintly troubled mirrors the anxiety clawing at her insides. The faintest sound of a ticking clock lingers in the background. A cryptic message lingers in her thoughts. Just before Venice would be the best time. It had come to her days earlier, found in the study of her husband, Edward Jeffries, among papers that weren't his. The typewritten note had sent a chill down her spine. Her eyes closed momentarily, her mind revisiting the unsettling discovery. Who could have left it there? And why was it addressed to her? As the train's door slides open with a smooth hiss, she steps inside, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and dread. She doesn't know what to expect, but she knows one thing for sure: whatever lies ahead, it's no ordinary journey. Chilling narration sets in, as the camera pulls away from her face, the station's murmur echoing in the distance. Sometimes, the answers we seek travel alongside us, hidden in plain sight, but sometimes they seek us first. The train begins to move, cutting through the French landscape like a sleek shadow, its pace quickening. Elsie is alone with her thoughts, and the weight of the mystery hanging in the air seems heavier with every passing mile. The journey has just begun. Elsie steps onto the train, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor, but the sound is drowned by the thunderous beat of her heart. The weight of the world seems to press against her chest, each breath a struggle to contain the storm inside. The compartment door closes behind her with a soft hiss, sealing her in, yet she feels more exposed than ever. The interior of the train is luxurious velvet seats, gold trim, the soft murmur of voices, but her mind is far from the elegance of her surroundings. Her thoughts whirl, spiraling back to the moment she had discovered the cryptic message. She'd found it in her husband's study, half hidden beneath a pile of his mundane papers, a single sheet of typewritten paper. Just before Venice would be the best time. The words had leapt off the page, like a haunting invitation that had no return address. Why Venice? And why her? She'd turned the note over in her hands, as if hoping the back might reveal more secrets, more answers, but it had been blank. Nothing but a chilling silence. Her mind races, replaying every detail she had found in the study. The faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air, the strange way the room felt off, as if it held something it wasn't meant to. Something was wrong, but she couldn't place it. Not yet. The train begins to pick up speed, its rhythmic motion almost hypnotic, but Elsie can't focus on the comfort of the ride. What did it all mean? Who was involved in this, whatever it was? Was her husband a part of it? A sudden chill runs through her spine, as if something unseen has brushed against her. She shivers, rubbing her arms, yet no amount of warmth can seem to chase away the growing sense of dread. The walls of the train feel too close, too suffocating. A nagging thought lingers at the edge of her mind. Is someone else watching? Her grip tightens on her luggage, but it's not the suitcase that she's really holding on to. It's her sanity, her fragile sense of control. And then she sees it. On the seat opposite her, a suitcase with a nameplate gleaming in the soft light. Parker Pyne. She blinks, the name seeping into her consciousness like a flash of lightning in a storm. Parker Pyne, the famous figure known for his personal advice column in the Times, a man who was rumored to solve the most impossible mysteries, to offer the kind of insight that made people feel like they had found their way back from the brink of despair. But what was he doing here? What was his connection to her? The questions crowd her mind, urgent and sharp. She needs to know more. She has to. And then the voice, a quiet, calm, measured voice, breaks through the storm in her mind. "Are you lost, Miss Jeffries?" She turns, startled, to find none other than Parker Pyne himself standing in front of her. His eyes are warm, almost kindly, but here is a calculating sharpness behind them, as if he already knows the puzzle she's trying to solve. He smiles, a little too knowingly. Her heart skips a beat as she nods, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I am." He leans in slightly, his voice lowering to a soft murmur, as if sharing a secret. "Don't worry, Miss Jeffries. I suspect the answers you seek are traveling with you, and we may not have to wait long to find them." Chilling narration follows, as the camera pulls back, the hum of the train blending with the rising tension. Sometimes, the answers we seek travel alongside us, hidden in plain sight. But sometimes, they're the ones who find us first. The train surges forward, slicing through the night, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and mysteries too deep to ignore. The journey to Venice has begun, but what will they uncover before the final stop? And more importantly, who will they uncover along the way? The clock ticks. Introduction of Parker Pyne. Elsie stares at the suitcase, the nameplate gleaming under the soft light of the compartment. Parker Pyne. The letters seem almost too bold, too deliberate, like they're daring her to take notice. She blinks, feeling an inexplicable flutter of recognition. Where had she heard that name before? Her mind races, and suddenly it clicks. The Times. The famous advice column, the problem of the day, written by none other than Parker Pyne, a man known for his uncanny ability to solve life's greatest mysteries with nothing but words. He wasn't just a columnist. He was a master at unraveling the most tangled problems, a man with a reputation that bordered on the legendary. A flashback montage swirls in her mind, Pyne's sharp, insightful replies to desperate letters from all walks of life. People wrote to him with questions about love, betrayal, guilt, and redemption, and Pyne's answers were always disarmingly clear, as if he could peer into the very soul of those who sought his counsel. She recalls a story in which a woman's marriage was saved, a man's reputation restored, and even a criminal's conscience unearthed, all through Pyne's subtle manipulation of truth and understanding. Elsie's pulse quickens. What was he doing here? She can't shake the feeling that here is more to this moment than chance. After all, nothing about this journey feels coincidental. The cryptic message, the unsettling discovery, and now, the presence of Parker Pyne. It's almost too much to ignore. Her thoughts are interrupted as the door to the dining car slides open with a soft whoosh, and in steps Parker Pyne himself. He's a man of average height, neatly dressed in a suit that's a touch out of date, but somehow still commands respect. His glasses catch the light as he surveys the room with a calm, measured gaze that immediately lock with hers. A knowing smile plays at the corner of his lips. Elsie freezes for a second, her heart skipping a beat. He's here. Of course, he's here. Without a word, Pyne makes his way over to the table, his presence oddly soothing, yet unsettling in the way he seems to cut through the tension in the air without even trying. He sits across from her, and his gaze softens, as if he already knows the story she's about to tell. "Miss Jeffries," he says, his voice low and confident, with a calm that unsettles her more than reassures. "You look as though you've been carrying a weight heavier than your suitcase." Elsie hesitates, the words she'd been rehearsing in her mind now seeming to falter at the edge of her tongue. But here is something in Pyne's demeanor, something steady and unshakable, that forces her to speak. She tells him everything. The cryptic message, the stolen jewels, the tension in her marriage, her growing suspicion that her husband might be hiding more than just an affair. Pyne listens intently, his expression never changing, but his eyes seem to pierce right through her, as if he's already solving the puzzle in his mind. "You've done well to share this with me, Miss Jeffries," Pyne says finally, leaning back in his seat. "But here is more to this than you realize. I believe the truth is far more tangled than you could have imagined, and I intend to unravel it for your peace of mind, if nothing else." Elsie looks at him, uncertainty still clouding her mind. "Can you really find the answers? Can you really solve this before we reach Venice?" Pyne's smile widens just a fraction. It's not a reassuring smile. It's something more elusive, something that speaks of secrets hidden just beneath the surface. "I am not in the habit of promising easy answers, Miss Jeffries," he replies, "but I do promise that the truth will reveal itself in ways you never expected. And perhaps, in the end, it will be the most surprising revelation of all." Chilling narration echoes as the train begins to roll faster toward the horizon, cutting through the night, its destination clear but still far away. The problem we seek to solve, the mysteries we try to outrun, they're already here, traveling with us, dressed in the clothes of our own fears. And sometimes, the answers we think we've been searching for have already found us, just waiting for the right moment to be unveiled. Elsie shivers, the weight of Pyne's words settling in her chest like a cold shadow. What was he really saying? And more importantly, what was he planning? The train lurches forward, but Elsie can't shake the feeling that something far more dangerous and far more personal is heading toward her. And time is running out. Rising tension, the mysterious incident. The rhythmic clatter of the train fades as the sleek Orient Express edges closer to Venice. The dim lighting in the carriage flickers for a brief moment, as if the train itself is holding its breath. Elsie's pulse races, the unease she's carried since the cryptic message tightening its grip. Something is wrong. Then, without warning, the air is split by the sharp, frantic cries of passengers. "Fire! Fire!" A woman's voice, strained with panic, echoes down the corridor, shattering the calm of the otherwise elegant journey. Elsie jumps to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. The train seems to lurch to a halt, and through the windows, she can make out the murky shadows of the canals below as the train slows just outside Venice. The carriage door bursts open, and a Slavic woman, face pale and eyes wide with fear, rushes into the dining car. "I see fire. Smoke. Smoke everywhere," she gasps, her voice trembling, her English barely intelligible. "In the compartment, quick. You must hurry." Panic spreads like wildfire through the passengers, and soon they are rushing toward the corridor, murmuring in confusion. The conductor appears, looking more composed than most, and quickly ushers the crowd back. He reassures them with practiced calm. "Nothing to worry about, folks. It's just a small incident. We'll take care of it." But Pyne's sharp gaze never leaves the Slavic woman. He watches her closely as she stumbles past him, her wide eyes darting nervously. Here is something in her panic, something too forced, too rehearsed, that sets off alarm bells in his mind. Could this be a distraction, a carefully orchestrated move to divert attention? Elsie watches as Pyne's eyes narrow slightly, his fingers drumming against his cheek with a deliberate calmness that almost seems out of place in such a chaotic moment. Something is off. The noise in the corridor slowly dies down as the fire is put out, but a strange, uneasy silence fills the air. Pyne gestures for Elsie to return to their compartment, and she follows, the tension between them thickening with each step. Was this fire just an accident, or was it part of something far more sinister? As they reach the door to her compartment, Elsie's stomach lurches, her heart skips a beat. The door creaks open, and they step inside. And then, the bombshell. Her jewelry, valuable pieces, heirlooms she's carried with her for years, is gone. The velvet pouch that had once held it now lies empty on the small vanity table. The unmistakable absence of the glinting jewel sends a wave of dread crashing over her. Her breath catches in her throat. It's gone. Elsie stumbles backward, a sense of disbelief washing over her. The jewelry had been there only hours ago, safely locked in the small compartment. No one had entered her room. No one had disturbed her except for the Slavic woman, who had been in the corridor only moments before the fire. Could it be a coincidence? Pyne steps forward, his eyes scanning the room with an almost predatory focus. His gaze flickers to the window, the door, and then back to the scattered remains of the jewelry box. Here is no sign of forced entry, no indication that the thief had used brute force. It's as if the jewelry simply disappeared into thin air. Elsie feels the room close in on her, the walls pressing against her chest. Who would do this? Why now? Her thoughts are a whirlwind, confusion, fear, and disbelief consuming her. But Pyne is already moving, his fingers gently brushing against the back of the vanity mirror. He pauses, his hand hovering over it, then a slight, almost imperceptible click. The mirror slides open, revealing a hidden compartment, but it's empty. The discovery is almost anticlimactic, yet it tells Pyne everything he needs to know. Someone had been watching. Elsie turns to him, her voice barely a whisper. Do you think it's the Slavic woman? Pyne doesn't answer immediately. He's already moving toward the door, his face a mask of calm. I think we're dealing with something much bigger than a simple theft. He pauses just before the door closes behind them, his words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. And I think someone wanted you to find this, because the real mystery is only just beginning. Cliffhanger. As Pyne and Elsie step back into the hallway, they hear hurried footsteps from behind. The sound grows louder, closer, a figure in the shadows, rushing toward them, carrying with them the unmistakable weight of something important. But by the time they turn, the figure is gone. Just another fleeting moment, another clue lost to time. Investigating the theft. The train slows as it reaches Venice, the cold mist rising from the canals as though trying to swallow the city whole. The air feels heavy, weighted with the secrecy that lurks in every corner. Elsie's mind races, the shock of the theft still fresh, her thoughts a twisted knot of confusion and fear. How could it have happened so quickly? The jewelry she had so carefully packed, the treasure passed down through generations, now vanished, like dust blown away by the wind. They are escorted to a small office in the station, a room heavy with the musty scent of old books and legal papers. The Slavic woman, detained for questioning, is sitting across from them, her hands trembling, eyes darting nervously. Her story seems rehearsed, disjointed, her explanation of the fire that almost destroyed the compartment too convenient, too pat. Pyne sits opposite her, his demeanor calm, unruffled. His eyes don't miss a thing. Every twitch of her fingers, every shift in her posture speaks volumes. His gaze is like a scalpel, cutting through the layers of fear and lies, searching for the truth hidden beneath. Elsie watches him, trying to understand how he sees what others miss, how his mind works so effortlessly in the labyrinth of deceit that has already ensnared her. The Slavic woman insists she's innocent. I swear, I saw the smoke. I saw the fire. There was nothing else. Her voice quivers, but Pyne doesn't flinch. He leans forward, his tone smooth, almost coaxing, yet the here is a steely edge beneath the polite words. Tell me again, he says, his voice like honey, smooth and steady, but with a hint of something sharper underneath. What happened after you left the fire? The woman's eyes flicker, just for a moment, before she answers. I went to help. I don't know. I didn't touch anything. Not the jewelry. Her voice cracks on the last word, a slip, an unintended admission. Pyne notices. He doesn't interrupt her. He waits, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build, like a slow burn waiting to ignite. The woman starts to fidget, shifting in her chair, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the table. Pyne watches, every detail registering in his mind, calculating, assessing. "Why did you return to the fire?" Elsie's voice trembles as she asks the question she's been too afraid to voice herself. "Why did you leave the train car and go back?" The woman hesitates, her gaze flickering to the door, the window, anywhere but their faces. She knows something, but she's not telling them. I had to. The fire, it was too much. I thought I saw someone. Someone important." Her words trail off, barely a whisper, as if the admission could cost her everything. She looks down, hands clasped tightly together, as though trying to hold herself steady. But Pyne isn't fooled. "Someone important." His voice is light, almost too casual, but the way he phrases the question is like a trap closing around her. "Someone who knew about the jewels." The woman's eyes widen, and for a moment, Elsie sees something shift behind them, a flicker of recognition. A cold chill runs down her spine. Pyne straightens in his chair, folding his hands together, his fingers steepled in thought. "I think you are a pawn in a much larger game, my dear. You didn't steal the jewels. Someone else did, and they used you to distract us." Elsie watches, the fear in her chest growing with every word. Could it be true? Could this woman really be innocent, or had she been played, just like everyone else? The Slavic woman's eyes flicker again, and Elsie catches the slightest movement, a faint gesture, almost imperceptible, toward the door. Pyne's gaze sharpens instantly, but he doesn't move. His silence is his weapon, his patience a sharp blade. "You are not telling us everything, are you?" Pyne's voice is softer now, more like a question than an accusation. He leans in slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Who are you working for?" The woman's face pales. She opens her mouth, then closes it. For a moment, it seems as if she will remain silent, but then she speaks, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I just wanted to help him. He said he'd make it right. But the man in the shadows, he said it had to happen this way. I had no choice." Pyne leans back in his chair, his face impassive. "The man in the shadows." He repeats the phrase quietly, as if tasting the words on his tongue, then looks over at Elsie. "This is bigger than we thought." Elsie's pulse quickens. She feels the floor beneath her shifting, her world tilting. Who was the man in the shadows? What had he meant by making it right? What dangerous game had they all been drawn into? Just as the tension seems unbearable, the door swings open, and a new figure steps into the room, a uniformed officer, his face tight with concern. "The jewelry," he says, breathless. "We've found something." Cliffhanger. Before Elsie can ask what they've found, the officer glances at Pyne, his face tense. "It's not what you think. Here is something off about it." What had they found? Was it the jewels? Or had something else, something far darker, been uncovered? The puzzle deepens. The mist hung thick over the canals of Venice as the two of them walked in silence, the weight of the last few hours pressing down on them. The evening sky was a bruised purple, the soft hum of the city drowned by their racing thoughts. Elsie's mind churned with the same question over and over. Where had the jewelry gone? It didn't make sense. The compartment had been locked, and the fire, real or imagined, had left no trace. The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together, no matter how hard they tried. They boarded the next train toward Trieste, and Pyne, ever the strategist, remained focused, his sharp mind always at work. The jewels were stolen while the train was crossing the bridge, he said, his voice calm yet full of the quiet authority that always made Elsie feel like he could see through every illusion. "But how?" Elsie asked, her voice trembling despite herself. She had been asking the same question for hours, but with each passing minute, the answer seemed to slip further away. How could anyone steal them without being seen? Pyne paused, his eyes scanning the horizon, as if the answer were waiting somewhere in the vast expanse of the darkening landscape. Here is only one way," he said softly, almost to himself. "The jewels never left the train. They were never smuggled out at all. Elsie stopped, her mind spinning. But they're gone. We searched. The compartments were locked. I know, Pyne replied, his expression unreadable. But I have a feeling they're closer than we think. Elsie felt a chill creep over her, though the evening air was warm. What do you mean? Closer? But they've disappeared completely. You saw it. Here is no way they could have left the train without anyone noticing. Pyne's gaze turned to the approaching lights of the bridge they were about to cross. Exactly, he said, his eyes narrowing. That's the point. The only way they could have been moved is if they were hidden inside the train itself. Think about it. If someone had the right kind of access, they could have smuggled the jewels out in plain sight without anyone realizing it. Elsie frowned, the thought gnawing at her. Inside the train. But how? In a secret compartment. Pyne smiled faintly, a glint of something almost dangerous in his eyes. It's not about compartments. It's about timing, placement. The bridge the moment we crossed it. It was the perfect opportunity. That's when they did it. The moment of distraction. The fire. It's all part of the plan. Elsie felt the world tilt again, the ground shifting beneath her feet as everything she thought she knew began to unravel. You think the fire wasn't an accident? She whispered, the realization dawning with a sickening clarity. Pyne nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the tracks ahead. It was staged to draw attention. It gave the thief the perfect cover to move the jewels without anyone noticing. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. As the train sped toward Trieste, the weight of the mystery felt heavier than ever, the pieces of the puzzle slipping through their fingers like sand. But why? What's the end game here? What do they want with the jewels? Elsie's voice was shaky now, her mind racing with the possibilities. I don't know yet, Pyne admitted, his expression grim. But I intend to find out. Elsie turned to him, her heart pounding. How can you be so sure? Pyne gave a small, enigmatic smile, one that both reassured and unsettled her in equal measure. Because I've just sent a telegram to someone who can help us. A contact in Trieste, who owes me a favor. Elsie raised an eyebrow, confused. A contact. A very reliable one, Pyne said, his voice low and calm. He took a moment, looking out the window as the train rumbled steadily along the tracks. The telegram will set things in motion. I am convinced we're close to the truth. Elsie watched him, intrigued and uncertain all at once. What if we're wrong? What if this is all just a wild goose chase? Pyne turned to her, his eyes locking onto hers with a sharp, unwavering focus. Then we'll have wasted a few hours and a few lives trying to uncover the truth. But Elsie, he let the words hang in the air, thick with meaning. I don't make mistakes, not like this. The atmosphere between them shifted, and for the first time, Elsie truly believed that Pyne was on the brink of something monumental. You are sure this is the right path? She asked quietly, the doubts in her chest starting to fade under the weight of his confidence. Absolutely. Pyne's voice was steady, unwavering. The moment we cross into Trieste, the game changes. We're about to uncover something far more dangerous than stolen jewels. Just as he finished speaking, the train slowed, pulling into the station in Trieste. The night air was cold and sharp, cutting through the fog that had settled over the city. They disembarked, the hustle and bustle of the station barely registering in Elsie's mind. Her thoughts were consumed by the mystery that had now tangled her life in ways she hadn't imagined. Cliffhanger. As they made their way through the station, Pyne stopped abruptly. He pulled out a small envelope from his coat pocket, the telegram. His face was unreadable, the weight of its contents heavy between them. It's all here, Pyne said, holding it up for Elsie to see. The breakthrough, the one clue that changes everything. Elsie felt her pulse quicken. What does it say? Pyne smiled cryptically, slipping the envelope back into his coat. You'll find out soon enough. The air felt electric, as though the universe itself were holding its breath. The next few steps, the next moment, could alter everything. What had he uncovered? And more importantly, what was the next twist in their dangerous game? The revelation. The narrow, winding streets of Constantinople were alive with the hum of merchants and the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, but the chaos of the city was a distant memory for Elsie as she walked beside Pyne. Her heart raced with an unsettling anticipation. They were closer than ever to the truth. Pyne had not said much since they left Trieste, but Elsie knew something was coming. There was a final piece of the puzzle, and it was hidden behind the doors of a grand, aging hotel in the heart of the city. Elsie had not known what to expect when they first made their way to Constantinople. The city's pulse was different here, intimate, ancient, yet strikingly modern in certain corners. But now, all of that felt irrelevant. There was only one thing that mattered: Edward, her husband, the man she thought she knew. Pyne led her up to a dimly lit room, its worn furniture a testament to decades of use. Edward Jeffries stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the setting sun. His face was drawn, his posture stiff with the weight of something unspeakable. Elsie stopped just inside the doorway, her breath catching. "Edward," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She hadn't seen him since that morning, the last time she had believed he was the man she loved. Edward turned slowly, his eyes clouded with guilt, but there was a tenderness in them when he met her gaze. "Elsie," he said, his voice hoarse, as though he hadn't spoken in days. He looked at her with such longing that it cut through the fog of confusion clouding her mind. "I never wanted you to know." Elsie's stomach churned as she stepped forward, the final pieces of the mystery gathering weight in her chest. "What happened, Edward? Why the jewels? Why everything?" Edward swallowed hard, taking a long moment before he spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. His words were like glass, fragile and ready to shatter. "I had no choice." Pyne stepped forward, his expression cold, yet oddly sympathetic. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Mr. Jeffries," he said, his voice clipped. "You didn't just lose those jewels, did you? You swapped them." Edward flinched, the accusation striking like a whip. "I didn't want to. I didn't want any of this," he murmured, his voice breaking. "But I had no choice." Elsie's heart skipped a beat. "Edward, tell me the truth." She stepped closer, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Why? Why did you do this?" Edward lowered his head, his shoulders sagging as the weight of his confession crushed him. He stared at the ground for a long moment, collecting his thoughts. Finally, he looked up at her, his gaze full of regret. I replaced the jewels. They were never the real ones. What you thought was stolen was never mine to begin with." Elsie took a step back, her mind struggling to keep up with the revelation. "What do you mean?" Edward exhaled shakily, his eyes brimming with something Elsie hadn't expected: vulnerability. "I needed to pay off Mrs. Rossiter." The name hit Elsie like a slap. "Mrs. Rossiter?" she repeated, her mind trying to connect the dots. "The blackmailer?" Edward nodded, his voice trembling. "Yes, she had something on me, something I could never escape. She threatened to destroy me, destroy everything we had." His hand clutched at his side, a silent testament to the torment he'd endured. Elsie felt the room spin as Edward's words settled like heavy stones in her chest. "What did she have on you, Edward?" she asked, her voice small. The question was like a needle, threading through the fabric of his carefully constructed world. Edward's eyes darted to Pyne, who stood silently observing. He didn't flinch at the scrutiny, but the atmosphere in the room had thickened, suffocating, charged with unspoken truths. Edward's gaze softened, but there was no escape from the shadow of his confession. It wasn't just the jewels. His voice was raw, and the words came slower now. "She knew about my past. My time in Africa, the things I did." Elsie's mind raced. Her husband's past, she had heard whispers, but nothing concrete. The tension in the air became unbearable. "Edward, what are you saying?" She had never heard him speak of Africa in such a way, never heard him hint at anything so dark. He inhaled deeply, as though preparing himself to face the storm. There were things I did. Things I can't undo. His eyes flickered with pain, but the truth was slipping out, like water from a broken dam. Mrs. Rossiter knew about it all. And she had the power to ruin you too, if she had gone to the press. Elsie's heart sank. She felt as though the floor had been ripped from beneath her. Her voice broke, barely a whisper. So you stole the jewels, to pay her off. Edward nodded, the shame heavy in his features. I thought it would be enough. I thought I could buy her silence, fix everything. Elsie took a step back, her chest tightening. Edward, how could you? You lied to me. You lied to us. Her voice cracked, the weight of betrayal seeping in. Edward reached out for her, his hand shaking. Elsie, I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could protect you. I thought I could make it all go away, but I was wrong. Pyne stepped forward, his calm demeanor cutting through the emotional storm. The jewels were never stolen, Mrs. Jeffries, he said softly, his eyes fixed on Edward. It was all part of your attempt to pay off Mrs. Rossiter and keep your past buried. You wanted to make everything disappear, but in the end it was never just about the jewels, was it? Edward's face twisted with anguish. He collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. No, he whispered, his voice breaking. It was never just about the jewels. Elsie stood frozen, caught in the aftermath of his confession. The weight of his words crushed here each one a dagger in her heart. What else, Edward? What else are you hiding? For a moment, the room was silent, the tension unbearable. Edward looked up, his eyes filled with regret. I wanted to protect you, but now I've dragged you into this mess. I am so sorry, Elsie. But the truth was undeniable now. The secrets were out, and the game was far from over. It's not over yet, Edward, Pyne said, his voice steady. To hear is still much more to uncover. Elsie's heart hammered in her chest, but she couldn't stop herself from asking, What's next, Pyne? And Pyne, ever the enigma, smiled grimly. Now we follow the trail back to Mrs. Rossiter, and this time we won't let her slip away. The game was far from finished, but with each revelation, they were getting closer to something far more dangerous than anyone could have predicted. Emotional resolution. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a soft amber glow over the city of Constantinople. The bustling streets had quieted, but in the room where Elsie and Edward stood, the world felt suspended in a fragile silence, like a moment that could slip through their fingers if they weren't careful. Pyne stood near the window, his silhouette framed by the soft light of the setting sun, observing the scene with his usual enigmatic calm. Beside him, Edward Jeffries sat at the edge of a worn armchair, his shoulders slumped, his face drawn with the weight of his confession. The man who had once seemed so strong, so assured, now appeared broken, vulnerable in ways that were raw and unmistakable. Elsie's mind was still reeling from the storm of revelations. It was hard to reconcile the man she had loved, the man who had held her hand and whispered promises of a future together, with the one who had deceived her. But there was something in his eyes, something that told her he had made a choice. He had taken responsibility, or at least part of it. As the silence between them stretched, it was Pyne who broke it, his voice smooth and measured. The jewels are safe, Mr. Jeffries, he said quietly, sliding the small velvet pouch from his jacket pocket and placing it on the table between them. It was a simple gesture, but it held the weight of their entire journey. Your wife need never know the full extent of what transpired. Edward's eyes flickered to the pouch, and then back to Elsie, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for it. Elsie, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I never wanted this for us. I never wanted you to be caught up in my mistakes. Elsie's heart ached at the sight of him so small in his guilt, so broken in his honesty. She had spent years building a life with this man, and now she was faced with the wreckage of that life, pieces scattered before her like shards of glass. But there was a softness in him now, an openness that had been missing when they first met, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered if that was enough. If she could still find a way back to the love they had once shared. She crossed the room to stand before him, her hands still cold from the weight of her thoughts. She wanted to say something that would fix everything, something that would make sense of the chaos. But the words wouldn't come. She had spent too long trying to make sense of the impossible. Edward looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't hate me for this. I did what I thought was best, but I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have told you everything." Tears welled in Elsie's eyes, but she held them back. "Edward, you should have trusted me," she said, her voice softer than she meant it to be. "But I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you've kept from me." The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of their shared history. Edward's head dropped, his shoulders shaking as the full force of her words sank in. He had betrayed her, yes. But more than that, he had betrayed himself. And in that moment, it wasn't just his guilt that hurt, it was the knowledge that he had lost her trust. "I don't know what to say," Edward whispered. "I've made a mess of everything, Elsie, but I need you to know that I never wanted this for you. The only thing I've ever wanted is for you to be happy." Elsie closed her eyes for a moment, the turmoil inside her chest threatening to spill over. She thought of the past, of the life they had built, of the man who had once made her laugh, who had held her through the hard times. And she thought of the lies, the betrayals, the secrets that had threatened to tear them apart. Could love survive that? When she opened her eyes, she found Pyne standing at the door, watching them with an air of quiet understanding. "It's time, Mr. Jeffries," he said. "If you are ever going to truly move on, you'll have to tell her the truth. But not all of it, just what matters." Edward nodded, his throat tight. He stood up slowly, his hands shaking as he took a step toward Elsie. "Elsie," he said softly, his voice full of sincerity. I replaced the jewels because I was desperate. But the truth is, here is something else I should have told you." Elsie's heart skipped a beat. She could feel her chest tightening again, as though she had to brace herself for the final blow. "What is it, Edward?" Edward hesitated, his eyes flickering to Pyne, who gave a small, encouraging nod. "I did it to protect you," he whispered, his voice filled with pain. "There was a time when I thought I could keep you safe by lying. But I was wrong. I should have told you everything." Elsie's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. The vulnerability in his eyes was raw, and she could see the remnants of the man she had once loved, struggling to find a way back to her. "You should have trusted me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But I think I am starting to understand why you didn't." Pyne stepped forward, his voice steady. "This is your moment, Mr. Jeffries. The only truth that matters is the one you share now." Edward nodded, his face set with determination. "I am sorry, Elsie. Truly. I am sorry for everything." Elsie felt something shift in her chest, something fragile and tentative. There was no magic cure for the damage that had been done, no simple fix for the years of deceit. But there was honesty now, and that was something she hadn't had before. And in that moment, as the silence stretched between them, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. Not for the past, not for the life they had lost, but for something new, a future where trust could be rebuilt, piece by fragile piece. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road they would walk together, or not at all. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Elsie whispered, her voice shaking. "But I think I want to try." And as Pyne quietly watched them, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "That's all anyone can ask for," he murmured, turning toward the door. "The rest, it's up to you." The final chapter of their journey had been written, but the real story of healing, of redemption, of starting anew was just beginning. Closing scene, final twist. The train's whistle sounded, a low, mournful note that seemed to reverberate deep into the heart of Constantinople. The platform was bustling with the usual noise and chaos of departing passengers, but inside the luxurious carriage of the Orient Express, a quiet tension lingered in the air, as if the very train was holding its breath. Elsie leaned against the window, watching the city fade into the distance, her eyes tracing the fading outlines of the minarets and bustling streets. The journey had taken a toll on her, more than she cared to admit. She glanced at Edward, seated beside her, the real jewels now safely in his hands, a token of the unraveling mystery, but also of the frailty of the trust between them. They had come so far, through deception and fear, and yet, the truth though laid bare was far from simple. She couldn't help but wonder, could it ever truly be enough to mend the rift that had formed between them? Edward caught her gaze and offered a small, tentative smile, the kind of smile that was once so familiar to her. It was the smile of a man who had lost his way but now found a glimmer of hope. His hand reached for hers, fingers trembling with vulnerability. "Elsie," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper amidst the clinking of glasses and murmur of conversations around them. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." She squeezed his hand gently, but her thoughts were far from the moment. Something gnawed at her, something deep and unresolved, as if there were still pieces missing from this puzzle. There was too much she didn't know, too much still lurking beneath the surface. A quiet clearing of the throat broke her reverie. Pyne. He stood at the end of the compartment, his ever-present notebook in his hands, his eyes glinting with a knowing, cryptic look. He caught her eye and gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to make her feel the weight of his gaze. "Edward, Elsie." Pyne's voice was as calm and assured as ever. He gave them a small, almost imperceptible smile, as though he had everything under control. "Don't worry about Mrs. Rossiter. I'll handle her from here." Elsie glanced at him, her thoughts swirling. Mrs. Rossiter. The woman whose name had hovered like a shadow over everything, the one whose blackmail had driven Edward to make such desperate choices. She hadn't fully understood Pyne's role in all of this, but she could see now that there was much more to the man than met the eye. Edward nodded, the faintest glimmer of relief crossing his face. "I trust you, Pyne. I owe you more than I can say." But Pyne, ever the enigma, only offered a brief, cryptic smile in return. "Consider it handled, Mr. Jeffries."